Oh,
Well, hi, hello, and welcome to everyone who is joining us, and whether live or watching the recording, and a particular big welcome to you, Lyn McCright, and from Texas. I'm here in Glasgow, Scotland, and you're joining me all the way from Texas. This is the June 2021 conversation in Three Principles Conversations, and I'm really delighted that you're joining us. I'm going to share some of your experience and the work that you do, which I think is largely in the field of healthcare with nurses in particular. But I'm really looking forward to perhaps before we get into that, you could, because I don't know this story, perhaps you could say a little bit about how you came across this work, the Three Principles, Sydney Banks, or the Three Principles Paradigm. It goes by a number of different names, but yeah, over to you, Lyn. Perhaps you could introduce yourself a bit.
okay. Yeah, that would be great. Well, the way that I encountered the principles was through Dr. Keith Blevins, and I had just moved actually from Europe. We lived in Germany at the time, back to Texas, and we had a mutual friend. I never did um, have the opportunity to be in the presence of Dr. Blevins with our mutual friend, but at any rate, she introduced me to him by saying, "You should go hear Dr. Blevins." And he has informal meetings at his home out in the country outside of Waco on Saturday afternoon, and he would be glad to meet you there. So that was the direct connection. And Keith and I have known each other now for 40 years.
Wow. Wow. Yeah. And were you working at that time? Were you working as a nurse at that
Yes.
point?
Yes, I was working in public health. That's my area.
Hmm.
I graduated from the University of Minnesota School of Public Health in nursing, and it seems that um, I just, when I graduated from nursing school, I had to decide, was I going to do this or that? And there were just two things that I loved, two things that I would jump out of bed for. One was for psych patients. I loved that. And then the other was for public health.
Hmm.
So I did some research, and I looked at the numbers, and I wanted to know what level of improvement people showed using either one of those areas of nursing. And the findings were really, in my view, very, very sad. There wasn't a lot of improvement in psych, in mental health.
Hmm.
And that is precisely why I went into public health, because I knew that I could make a difference. And so now, having, encountered the principles, I have the opportunity to combine my love for both of those areas.
Wow. And when you first went to those meetings that Keith was hosting, um, did this grab you immediately, or did you have a time of what's all this about? How did that go for you?
Well, no, I must say that it did grab me immediately, because it was a 1 hour drive in Texas. That's considered normal, but I had to make the extra effort to get to his home on a day that I wasn't already coming to my town to work. So yes, it added a lot of time. And from the very first meeting, I knew that I would continue to come and meet with the people that he was talking with. And my husband came along one time, and as we were just leaving and about to, in the car, about to enter the road from his driveway, my husband Ted stopped and looked at me, and he said, "So, this really is a spiritual universe, isn't it?" And that's all he's ever said.
Mm, mm. And do I take it from that he didn't continue to come with you, even though he'd had that clarity about what was on offer.
Well, he did come. Dr. Blevins was so gracious to agree to come and do a special conference for our Holistic Nurses Association here in Central Texas in the fall of 2015.
Mm.
So I had the opportunity to introduce him to all of my nursing colleagues locally. And it was a marvelous opportunity because one of my colleagues has have seen something so deeply. We had a little program the night before after the Texas barbecue, and just a brief introduction. And then the next morning, as he began to speak, she realized that all the pain that she had been carrying for about 10 years with concern over her family, her daughter's divorce, her other daughter's alcoholism, her husband's PTSD, her problems at work, her health problems were all thought.
Mm.
And in that moment, she realized that everyone had their own wisdom, could live their own life, and the pain simply moved from her body, her feet, her torso, and her head, and has never returned in 7 years.
Wow. Wow. I must say I had a similar, I mean, perhaps not as profound as your colleague, but I had a similar experience on my first weekend where I kind of stumbled into this by accident, um, a bit over 10 years ago. And one of the realizations I had was, of course, my kids have an innate wisdom within them too. And I didn't realize I wasn't a particular sort of worry war of a parent, but in the moment that I saw that they have everything that they need within them to live peaceful and contented and happy lives, the worry that I didn't know that I'd been carrying evaporated. It was, it was only in the in with hindsight, I thought, oh, what a weight I seem to have had, thinking I had to try and manage all the circumstances, not just of my life but of theirs, in order for us all to kind of progress. And whew, what an unburdening.
Oh, freedom,
Yeah,
freedom.
yeah, yeah. Can we cut? But we've kind of jumped forward to 2015, and I'm curious. So because I imagine you mentioned that you had it was a holistic nurses organization, but I imagine the principles must have been quite a different approach
Oh, totally.
from what you'd been working with up until then. And so I'm interested in how what you first saw for you, and then how I know that you now work in this field and you have done for many years now. But I'm interested in how you got from when we're going to those meetings with Keith, to what then happened.
Right. Well, one day Keith said to us, to me especially, that Sydney Banks was going to be speaking in Miami, and that this might be the last time that he would speak. It happened to be the year 1980, so he spoke for decades beyond 1980.
It was always the last time.
That's right. That's right. Sid always told us, I've told this story 100 times before. So I have nothing new to say. So I think that may be where that came from. At any rate, we flew down to Miami. I actually flew together with Joe Bailey's wife now, Michael Bailey.
Mhm.
And we were at the conference, and it was at the VA, the Veterans Administration Medical Center in Miami, a huge auditorium filled with over 400 people.
Wow.
And every time Sid spoke, I heard truth. Now, my background in regard to my family growing up is both very religious and spiritual. So I was accustomed to hearing truth.
Mm.
And I had simply never heard it spoken in such a ordinary way and so easily understood. Um, and every time he spoke about examples of people, I thought about my patients in Waco. My public health patients, generally on the lower end of the economic scale with lots of medical problems. And I I actually offered a couple of examples in that room that day, but I have not had a question since.
Mm, mm, mm. So this is still quite early on in your journey with the SIDS work, and where did you go from there? How did it evolve you
Well,
know,
the next
in your
year, I had the privilege of coming back to Miami for what was billed as the first annual Three Principles Conference.
mm,
And as I sat there and looked around the room, I was astonished. That room full of 400 people, in my recollection, shrank to only 12 people.
wow.
Apparently, not everyone heard what I heard that day.
Mm, mm, mm.
Well, here's Teresa. She's the one who had that beautiful experience of releasing pain
Hi.
when she heard Dr. Blevins speaking. She's my colleague now in our practice advancing holistic health. We're
Excellent.
yeah, we have a school of continuing education for all licensed health professionals. So we offer a certificate as a health coach to any professional who is licensed and would like to learn about using the principles in their life and in their work.
Well, that's excellent, and I will put your website on the notes with the recording.
Oh, great, great.
Yeah, so that
Yeah.
people can contact you, if they want to find out more of or if this is particularly relevant for them or for whatever reason. Um,
Also, beyond that, I actually did attend some trainings with Dr. George Pransky and Robert Cosson, and that was when we were living in California. So I immediately saw the applicability for nursing.
mhm.
And this was prior to any published material. There had not been a single book written about what we were doing. So I was without resources,
Yeah.
as it were. And nevertheless, I elected to open my own private practice of nursing, which I called nurse consulting because we hadn't invented coaching yet then in 1986. And I just was open because my area is public health to meeting with people in all kinds of areas in our county, in our community. So I met with business people like the Chamber of Commerce in Kiwanis. I saw people privately in my own office. I worked with a large industrial firm. Robert Cosson came down to Monterey and we worked with a firm that was having a lot of on-site job accidents. I talked to an outpatient mental health center, both the patients and the staff at the same time in the same room. We did a weekend workshop at the Carmel Community Center. I even had a radio show. And I was just enjoying every minute of my work in regard to bringing this to the profession and to the public. I even did a research project, which I then presented later at a, a the 1987 annual conference, which was held in Florida. And that was the time when the women from the Modelo Project came to speak to the conference.
Oh, how
And
fascinating. Hmm.
yeah, in them, I saw my own public health patients in Waco. And I was astonished that they were up on the stage speaking because no one that I knew would have presumed to position themselves that way.
Hmm.
So I was thrilled. I was thrilled to hear their words
Yeah.
and to know, how Roger Mills and the Modelo Project had brought the principles to their housing project.
Yeah. Yeah. Truly amazing project. Lynn, can I cut across because I'm curious about um not just what you've done professionally, but your, how did it change you? Because or did it? But I mean, it's often said that the most important insight is the insight that we have for ourselves, and that's what really empowers and enlivens that anything that we have to share with other people. Would you say that's been true for you?
Well, I had kind of a reverse experience in a way. Shortly after I had opened my private practice, I we lived overseas in Asia, and at that time I was extremely, extremely ill. So my chronic illness did not allow me to work. So I was so grateful for the opportunity that I had had before that.
Hmm.
And we did come back to the United States, and I finally did see a doctor who told me that I might be ill as long as 5 years. So when that time came, the 5 year time mark, I decided to go back to school because I was so determined once again to share this with my profession. And I started writing a nursing theory in regard to the principles. I found it the other day and I threw it away. It was so bad because at that time, Sydney was not even referencing things as three principles, but a little book had been written describing four. And of course, they were way off base from what we know today.
Mm.
I guess I would have to say, though, Christian, that my own experiences were just very subtle. I
Mm.
already had a wonderful background in regard to spirituality and knowing the value of interpersonal communication and home and family. And one time my daughter came home from school and I was still in my bathrobe and she had a friend with her, and the friend said, "Well, why is your mom still in her bathrobe? It's 4 o'clock." And Emily simply said, "Oh, she always wears that." So I was ill for a very long time,
And do you think
but
your
it
understanding of the principles helped you throughout that period?
well, it did because I wrote little poems about Emily saying that, and about packing my bags to go to my PhD program. I had to fly there, and so that was a weekly occurrence, and I stayed for the week and then came back home every weekend. Well, by the time I was finished with that program, I was so ill, literally, that I was crawling on my hands and knees to the bathroom. So I was too tired to stand up, and it was time for me to go home.
Mm.
It was interesting to me that my topic for my dissertation, I was planning to have the topic be health. Well, it's a broad subject, as you know. And what I realized was that every definition of health missed the mark because they didn't consider the principles in what was being talked about. And as a very fatigued ill patient, the only thing that mattered to me was literally getting through the next day. But I had another companion with me on this journey who happened to have been um, Keith's wife, Valda, and she and I raised our daughters laying on the floor. And we just had the opportunity to play with them, be present with them, oh, just relish every moment, enjoy every moment of their curiosity and personal discoveries. So that it really was the principles that made it possible for me to be as well as I was during that time.
Yeah, yeah.
They always say that no one can take it away from you, and yet where was this help? It seemed to have disappeared under the waves for the time. But I always had uh, a trust, I guess, that um, that my health would return
Mhm. And I
in
think
regard to physical.
And I think what you're describing in that sense of being able to find joy and peace and fun, and even when you were feeling physically exhausted, is the health that we're talking about, isn't it? That you
Oh,
have
I
that
guess so.
capacity to that that- to connect with that aspect of ourselves, and the realization that nothing, even chronic ill health, has the power to remove that unless we
Wow,
believe it does. Yeah.
right.
Mm.
Yeah, I was so fatigued that I had undertaken my own business when I was in graduate school. I couldn't work a regular nurse's schedule because of the rotating shifts. So what I did was I started with a cosmetic company, but one of my clients was right across the street from me. And yet I was too tired to get up and deliver her products across the street. I had to wait for Emily to come home from school and take it for me.
Mm.
So, but once again, it was that, trust that sustained me.
Yeah. 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 And so, obviously, from what you're describing at this point, your daughter's still at school, and how has life evolved and moved on, and how has your work in sharing the principles moved on since then?
That was interesting. I actually had the opportunity to attend a training, and I think it was 2 weeks, maybe three, at the Advanced Human Studies Institute with Roger Mills. And there was only one other classmate there with me who happened to be Christine Heath.
Mhm. I was just speaking to her this week.
We spent those 2 weeks or three together. And in fact, yeah, Sid happened to be there at the same time, and his wife Barbara was there. So it was, a, I guess, well, it was just in a way. Obviously, I'm lacking for words here again. In a way, it was so simple and so ordinary, and in another way, it was so beyond imagining that something had actually been found that could help people.
Yeah, yeah. And what were the next steps that happened in your life, or how did it unfold from there?
Well, I would have to say that when Chris and I were in Florida, I actually was pregnant. So Emily was born very shortly thereafter. I was amazed that they even let me on the plane. But when I asked Roger, I said, well, I'm planning to stay home with my baby. Is that going to keep me from being qualified, to do this work? And he said, oh, absolutely not, because of course he knew it was a lifetime of learning that we're encountering now.
Mm, mm,
So I just relaxed about that, and I have to rejoice in the fact that Emily has never known anything other than a three principles family.
mm,
So she is that next generation.
mhm.
And we've all learned and grown, but it's so natural to her because she's never known it to be any other way.
Mm, mm.
It just makes complete sense to her.
And so she's kind of absorbed it by osmosis, and
Right.
has she become interested in working in this field, or is it just something that helps in her life and work and everything that she does anyway?
Yeah, no, she's started out as a massage therapist, and as such, she would qualify to be in our school and receive the health coach certificate. But no, she decided that she wanted to study water quality. So
Oh,
she went on to do that. And so the other day I was in her town where she inspects the water, and she looked up at the water tower and she said, "Mom, they have really good water here. I just tested it." So she's following in my public health footsteps.
Mhm, mhm, mhm. So once you've described then that the encountering the principles, the various different trainings, and having your daughter, and then the period abroad, and the chronic illness, and once you had emerged from that, where did your journey take you?
Well, it really was um, quite close to the time that Dr. Blevins came to our hometown, Waco, and he was able to do a presentation, which was a 7-hour presentation. And that was the first time that I heard about teaching this through logic. Now, I had already had my private practice back in '86,
Mhm.
but this year was 2015. And he brought something entirely new that really opened my eyes to the possibilities of bringing this to a scientific professional community such as healthcare. And what he brought us were what he describes as the implications, not applications.
Yeah. So for anybody listening and wondering who this is, I mean, Keith Blevins and his wife, Alda Monroe, can be their website is Three Principles Paradigm, and there's a whole lot of information about their take on this, really, there.
Right. The word three is spelled out THREE. He's been, well, obviously you can hear, the person who's been the glue, the connector piece between myself and my personal family and the larger Three Principles community. I just rejoice in the opportunity. So I taught well, I mean, we could say taught, we know we can't teach, we can only learn through insight, but that was what I attempted to do in my private practice starting as long ago as 1986. But it wasn't until 2016 when I opened my business that I had something that could be useful to people in regard to logic and teaching through logic that which can only be understood through insight is still a very foreign concept, and yet we're doing it. And I've already had my continuing education school for 5 years, and when we opened on 3 continents. This is no small endeavor. The problems of healthcare, as we learned in 2020, are worldwide.
Yeah, 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 yeah. And you were already doing much of your work online before lockdowns came along, so presumably
Right.
you had to pivot fairly regularly to deal with that.
That's true. That's true. The nurses, generally speaking, were so busy at that time. It and they were affected economically in a lot of cases because their family members were affected, and of course there was a concern, as you know, about bringing COVID home to their families. So there were well, I just knew that once again, and had seen this before, that I was exactly in the right place at exactly the right time.
Yeah.
So most recently, Teresa and I had the opportunity to present to a large group here in Texas, the Texas Organization of Nursing Leadership. They have 715 hospitals, and the conference encompasses them all. We had the opportunity to present the half-day pre-conference
Mhm.
to the top leaders within nursing in the state of Texas.
And how's that being received, Lynn? Because it is a new paradigm. It is a very different way of approaching things. That that the role that that this the fact that everything we experience, the whole of our experience, is actually thought created rather than circumstance created, if you like. How is that? How is that received? And when you present it, as it were, cold to a new audience of
Right,
scientifically based people?
right. All evidence to the contrary. Absolutely.
Hmm.
Well, we have only just really begun to follow up on those leads. The
Hmm.
best contacts are the people that we've met over the last 3 or 4 years that we've been attending that particular conference, and our contacts within our group, our local group here as well. But one of our students was also there, and she helped answer questions, and she worked with us in our virtual exhibit hall. And her chief nursing officer came to the meeting, unbeknownst to her, and heard something.
Mm.
And she asked the student, "Are you involved in this?" And the student said, "Yes. I've been studying with them. I got my board certification as a nurse coach, and yes, I'm working with Lynn and Teresa's model." And the nursing supervisor, the nursing chief nursing officer, is now in contact with us about doing a project for her entire nursing staff. And this is a very small hospital in a small town in West Texas, but I think in a way, a perfect little jewel of a town to start, because when we see the results of what we've worked with for that group, it surely will expand. The basis of our research that we've done within our school is what Linda Ramus and Kathy Casey did with the Valley Medical Center in Santa Clara. And they did 2 days, 4 days altogether of workshops with the nurses in Santa Clara, California, Santa Clara County. And Linda Ramus did the statistics on it before and after testing to see if there was change. So that's already embedded within our program. And we've just received back now from Baylor University here in my city, the results statistically of the previous 5 years students um, results. And what it shows, the terminology, of course, is all backwards, but what it shows is that the test scores increased with each of the 3 courses that are required to sit for national board certification. And I don't want to make it sound like their resilience increased. It did not. What increased was their insight, their understanding of the principles working in their life and
Mm.
in their work. So instead of
Lynn,
looking at it as
could you give an example of that? Maybe in one of the students
right,
that you worked with.
oh, absolutely, absolutely. But I'll just say in summary that instead of the score indicating an increase in resilience, I see it as going down and being a deeper understanding of their own natural resilience.
Right, right.
So it's been really fun. I mean, I get so enthused about the classes that we do, the live classes, because people bring their experiences, their personal experiences and their work experiences. And one nurse who had worked in the emergency room had a young man that was wheeled in because he was too morbidly obese even to walk by himself. So he said, "Well, I want to make some changes, but I want to talk to the doctor. I want to find out what's possible." And she said, "Well, the doctor's over there and he can't come right now, but let's just you and I talk." And as the conversation rolled around, it was really beautiful because she said she had the insight to say, "Well, calories are energy, and you are all fueled up to go in any direction you want." no other healthcare professional had ever said anything so positive to him. He
Mm,
just immediately saw that all the limits were off.
mm,
And we can't know what became of any of that because it was just, a one time in the emergency room, but life changing, absolutely, could have been. We can't know. And I have another wonderful student who was working with 80-year-old um, diabetic patients, and one day an 85-year-old lady came in and said, "Well, I just can't remember to take my blood pressure medicine. I have a terrible time remembering to give myself insulin. I haven't checked my blood sugar lately." And Jan just sat with her quietly and said, "Well, what's happening?" And she said, "I just lost 4 family members in 3 months." And she was just beside herself. This was pre-pandemic even.
mhm.
But the lady said, "Do you mean to tell me that I'm not taking care of myself because I'm thinking about them?" Jan had told her she couldn't be in 2 places at once. She
Mm,
couldn't be here now taking care of herself and living in the past.
mm,
And she saw that immediately. And when she came back 3 months later, she had more blood sugar checks than she'd had in the previous 3 years. And she had an ideal A1C
mm.
for a woman her age. So it's in the lab work.
Yeah, and it's interesting because that's, you're obviously describing quite a brief conversation between the nurse and the patient, but
20
the
minutes maximum.
profound when something triggers an insight in a patient, or indeed anybody, but in this case in a patient, that the outcome can be profound.
Right, right.
Mhm.
So I had the experience, the privilege of being coached through another school. Happened to be a school in England, and my coach was rushing to get out of the rain, and he was late in arriving, and I didn't really have a topic selected that I wanted to ask about, but it was being recorded like this, and so I thought, well, I'm not always timely, and he's late, so let's talk about that. And as we talked, I could just feel something going directly into my chest. And then it turned at a 45-degree angle, 90-degree angle. And I wondered what has just happened here. And I didn't know until the next morning when I woke up what it was. Well, I had no thought. I have for years chided myself about timeliness. I have constantly had a record playing in my head saying, "You're going to be late again." None of that was there. I was able to focus directly, just do all my normal preparations without extraneous thought, arrive where I needed to be on time. And I thought mistakenly that I had seen something about time. Well, Dr. Blevins corrected me on that. Time is man made. What I saw was thought.
Mm, mm. And was it the case that until it went, you weren't fully aware of how much headspace it was taking up? If I can,
Oh, so distracting.
yeah.
So distracting.
Mm,
Yeah, Dr. Blevins even talks about that in his own work with a large Midwestern medical center. He said that the physicians that he worked with were able to release their distracting thoughts. And what that meant was it allowed them to focus more directly on the client in front of them. They
Mm.
were able to find the answer to the client's issue more rapidly. They were able to get to leave work on time, get home to their families, and have better work-life balance.
Mm. Mm.
The burnout rate went down institution-wide 12%.
Yeah. 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 And it's a, that's a really useful reminder of how intensely practical this gaining an insight into this understanding can be. How life changing, and that has been my experience for sure.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
And that's why I love my school. I want, so why nursing would be the question, and the answer is because nursing is the largest profession
Is that right?
in the world,
Ah,
everywhere,
interesting. Okay.
because we man the hospitals 24/7,
Mm-hmm.
365,
Mm-hmm.
never a day off.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And we touch so many people's lives. And through every life we touch, actually, our business goal is to bring resilience to all of humanity through nursing.
Hmm.
And
That's
the
really cool.
goal, yeah, but I mean, as 3.8 million nurses in the United States alone, 14 million or more nurses worldwide.
Mm.
And every country has nurses. I'm just so fortunate to be here now. I mean, who knew? I had no clue, where this profession was going to land me,
Yeah.
but I see it as absolutely unlimited, the possibilities, especially now that people worldwide are much more aware of their health and of health promotion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and I just hadn't thought about it, but you're absolutely right. The vast numbers, and also because one of the drivers behind the series of conversations, which has now been going for about 5 years, I think. It started off with a 1 year series that I did with Brett Chitty, and then it's just continued on a more ad hoc basis every
Mhm.
month. But one of the things I'm very interested in is really empowering and encouraging people to become, I'm use the word teachers, but that isn't always the right word. Sometimes it's facilitators, or sometimes it's just something they bring to their own profession. But nurses are in an ideal position, as you've just pointed out with those examples that you gave, to pass this. So even just a tiny nugget here and a tiny nugget there, the ripples from that can be vast.
That's the way I see it. We just there's no end to the numbers of people's lives that nursing can touch.
Yeah.
And we're at a point in time now, um, where a large number of nurses have left the institutions and are now establishing businesses for themselves
Mm-hmm.
because they see the missing gaps in the healthcare system, and they have the knowledge and the expertise to fill those gaps. And they're doing it on as part of private enterprise.
Mm-hmm.
They're doing it as through being in business for themselves. And nurse coaching, in my view, of course, I started the school. The certification only 7 years old, national board certification, which is recognized globally. But our school has been in existence for 5 years.
Mm.
So I've always been at the leading edge of nursing without knowing it. I received a scholarship in high school that allowed me to go to the university, which I did. My both of my brothers were there. Most of my classmates went to the local hospital to study nursing, but I went to the university. And then later on, I elected to go for my master's And that involved a brand new area at that time, which is now called nurse practitioner, which is not so new anymore, but in 91 it was almost unheard of. Well, in 77 rather. And then I was still so when I was in my school of public health, I was in a sense very disillusioned because I thought there's got to be more to health than diet and exercise. Where's the rest of it? You know, but it wasn't until I met Dr. Blevins in 1980, 79, the fall, that I was able to see what that missing piece was. Oh yeah, the missing link.
Mhm.
Right, Sydney Banks. So that's when I saw it. And so uh, I just I the way that I see things is just directly. So as a nurse, knew that I had to bring this to other nurses.
Mm, mm, mm. Lynn, I'm wondering at this point, well, I know Teresa is on the call. I don't know if Teresa's able to join us, but I wonder whether it would be, hi, Teresa. I'd love to, we always open it up for questions and comments, and I know that you guys work together. So, I mean, please do feel free to come in if there's anything that you've like to add.
Well, these were part of stories I hadn't heard the whole story before, so that was really fun. Um, like Lynn said, we've been working together for 5 years in the school, but we've known each other since 2010, I think.
Right. So
And so we started out as holistic nurses. She brought the holistic nursing chapter to Central Texas,
Mhm.
and I had never heard it about holistic nurses before, even though I was very interested in all the holistic modalities and that kind of thing. But a funny little story was when she was talking about these principles. One day we were coming back from a conference, and she's like, I really want to bring these principles to nurses. And I was like, well, how do you learn them? And she's like, you can't learn them. And I went, what do you mean? I went to nursing school. I can learn anything.
I can't
And
teach them. I can't teach them.
I can't teach them.
Mm.
Um, but it set off a storm in my head of like, what are these things? And, how do they help you? And it was, I don't know, maybe 8 months later or so that I was at that same conference with Lynn when Dr. Blevins talked about why aren't we more resilient? And that was when I heard a very, very deep level, which actually transformed my health at that conference, because I heard it was my thoughts creating my dis-ease that was manifesting in my body, and I was miserable. I had chronic pain for 5 years. It was a very long time,
Mhm.
and I wanted to quit nursing. I thought, if this is what it is, I'm done. Plus we had some family things happening, and when you hear these principles at that deep level, it does something for you, body, mind, and spirit. It was that piece of, for me, it was that mind body connection that I had always been looking for. In many modalities, there's, it's getting in touch with you and, how the mind affects the body and that kind of thing. I never could quite understand it. That day, I understood it.
Mm.
I realized what was going on. And it was literally that shift that created the experience within me of complete healing.
That's
And I think we both decided at that conference that this has to go out, because within a month we were both signed up for nurse coaching program because we had to get certified ourselves.
mhm.
And within 6 months we opened our school, and here we are. It's wonderful.
Fabulous, fabulous. And it's interesting the the synchronicity and the serendipity of you both being there and having these experiences, and how I often think that there's so much that can be achieved by these fortuitous and almost coincidental collaborations. And it's, sometimes it's extraordinary what we can do together. It becomes that alone might be more difficult, um, yeah. So lovely, Teresa. Thanks so much for sharing all of that. Yeah.
Yeah, for myself at that conference, I was standing at the podium and I looked out at the audience and I realized that I was standing on the same cliff where Florence Nightingale had stood. But instead of the dying soldiers and horses, what I saw was the dying healthcare system. And I knew that the resilience paradigm could change that. And working with the principles has been my entire focus ever since.
Mm. Mm. I think I've heard the recordings of that conference, and
Oh,
I think they're available on Keith. Not that I heard anything that you
they
guys
are.
like,
They are. That's right. That's
but they're
exactly.
available. People can purchase them on Keith and Valda's website. Yeah, yeah. It's a very powerful it's a very powerful um conference. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, two of my other friends. Well, it was local, so all of my friends came, and two of them have become students in our school, and one is now a teacher.
Mm.
The one that I talked about who worked with a diabetic woman, the woman with diabetes, and I I just my heart just goes so open when the nurses share their stories with me,
Mhm.
because I get to hear how not only they've impacted somebody else's life, but in turn, how that has benefited them.
Yeah,
Because we teach through insight. The goal of all coaching is insight, but we simply start out that way.
yeah,
And it is a bit of a oh mind shift, because when we tell people about our school, we have to tell them that there's no intellectual learning, that it's all learned experientially through insight. Well, they've never had a nursing course that was like that. So there's a period of adjustment, because we're so accustomed to just memorizing and coughing it back up on the test.
I imagine you have people scribbling away in notebooks at the beginning, and then the
We do.
notebooks are
Yes,
abandoned by the end.
right, right. At some point, they think, didn't they say this before? Then, yeah, we say it the same thing every time. We're like Sid, we've never told a different story. It's always the same. So I just, for my own understanding of this, we are one of 5 schools in the United States, and a new one has just started in Canada. But we see this as the leading edge of the profession, because it is about promoting health.
Yeah.
And now Teresa and I have big goals beyond just our little school, which is to bring the principles to all nurse coaching programs.
Well, yeah, yeah. And the very attractive, I mean, there's so many attractive features of this work, but one of the very attractive things is Keith sometimes talks about it as the subtractive aspect of it. That's not um I I went through a phase in my life, when there was just constantly more things being added into the self-improvement program, and it was exhausting. Absolutely exhausting.
Yes.
And nothing really worked consistently. So you think, well, I did another one then, more exercise, more meditation, more writing. But what's so lovely about this is, I mean, you described it beautifully, Lynn, when you spoke about waking up that morning, and there was quiet in your head, and people get have these their own individual experience. It doesn't always look and feel like that, but what is common is that things are coming off your mind or off your shoulders, or that leaving the body. That there's a that everything we need is already within, and that the process of learning here by insight is one of releasing and letting go, and less burden, not more. And who knew?
Yeah, and of all the people in the world right now who need less burden, my view is that healthcare takes priority because they serve all the rest of us in humanity.
Mm-hmm.
This should come to healthcare first.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Because when people are in distress, they turn to the healthcare providers.
Mm-hmm.
And Teresa, tell about what you saw when you wanted something for people in the middle of the night.
So in my thinking about how to help people, because that's always been my view and my desire, I wanted something that could help people in the middle of the night, even at 3 a.m. when no one was around.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's when people reach their limit.
Yeah.
That's when people go to the ER. That's when you've tried everything that you know how to do. And I thought it was a modality. I didn't know it was the principles. There's actually a place, a space where you can drop thought, like you said, the subtraction of knowing that you're creating this snowball effect in the middle of the night that can settle you down, that can help you to relax and know that in this moment you're perfectly fine. And when that happens, people have answers they didn't have before, or they are able to make it until morning, until they can, you know, see their primary care, or whatever's going on actually resolves. You know, I bring on a lot of things myself through that busy mind, through
Yeah.
that overthinking. I really liked what you were talking about a minute ago, Christian, about all of these things that you were trying and you had to do it more. And
Yeah.
sometimes it worked and sometimes it didn't. Well, I had a huge insight coming home from the hospital one day. My husband was in for a little heart problem, and I was racking my brain trying to think about what I could do to help him. And I realized I had an insight. I was actually listening to, I think it was a Sid Banks tape. Um, and this flood of knowing came across me that was like, oh, it's because of the principles that the modalities work.
Mm.
It's not the modality, but if through the modality we have the experience of touching this piece of health or our thought in the moment, or recognizing that piece of us that is the thinker, that healing happens.
Yeah.
Kind of like that side effect when you see something like that as the truth or how it really works, and then you get the clarity of like, oh, that's what's happening. So it was
Yeah.
very interesting to me. That was early on learning about these principles, but it has exploded for me ever since, especially when I lose sight of them.
Which
That's
everybody does.
yeah,
Everybody
but
does.
knowing that that's okay.
Yeah, and that was also wonderful for me, that there's no requirement to be constantly improving and always, in a great space or any of that stuff. It's an explanation of what's going on, good, bad, or indifferent. Guys,
Yeah.
I'm noticing the time, and we've got a couple of minutes left, Lynn, which I'd like to let you, I don't know if there's anything you'd like to finish on, because I do need to finish at the top of the hour. So,
Oh, just to say that the world opened when I heard Sid speak for the first time, and the direction of my life was set. I was so open and trusting in that moment and in every moment since. I just haven't wavered, and there have been, as I said, no more questions.
Lovely, lovely. Well, thank you so much for making the time to do this call and everything that you've shared, Lynn. Um, perhaps you could just remind us of your website, and I will put a link to it in the notes below the recording.
Okay. Well, it's just two words, very simple. The first word is nurse, NURSE, and the second word is coaching.
Nurse coaching.
Nursecoaching.com.
Lovely. Well, thank you so much. And people can contact you there if they want to know more about what you're doing and the programs that you offer. And it was lovely to meet you in person. I think we've been on calls together in the past. It was lovely to meet you in the person. Thank you very much. And thank you to Teresa for joining us today.